Hello, and welcome to the Pilot Podcast, where we speak with people who have taken unique paths and have some stories to tell us. I am Helga, a second year student at Kaospilot, and today I'm sitting with John Michael, who is a ballet dancer, a public speaker, and a teacher in creativity and leadership, amongst others. Welcome.
Thank you.
I wanted to start this conversation on asking you about your background and a little bit into the childhood and the experiences of growing up in the US.
I grew up in Georgia, South Georgia, which is very conservative, very racist. Not a place that I think fondly of now. But my childhood was beautiful. I have incredible parents, many siblings. And early on, I think probably just because my older brothers were playing football and basketball and baseball and track, and I did all the sports as well. But the local dance teacher was interested in more boys performing in the Nutcracker, and she came to my mom wondering if one of my older brothers would perform. My mom said, no, but I think my youngest will. And so I wouldn't say I immediately fell in love with ballet, but it became my sort of pathway. It became my identity. And then I moved away from home at 14 to go to boarding school to study ballet full time.
How old were you when you started?
I started performing when I was 6 years old, but I didn't really get serious about ballet until I was 12. And that's because you're eligible to go away to summer programs. And I went to New York City and I studied at the School of American Ballet. And I think it was the first time I looked around and I saw a whole community, an ecosystem. Like I was in a class with all other boys and I saw, there's a whole life here. There's a whole world. And I really wanted to be a part of that world. And so at 12, I got serious about my training and that I was good enough to go away for school when I was 14.
It took 2 years.
Yeah, I was given, ballet is very selective. It has nothing to do with anything besides genetics. My parents gave me very good genetics for ballet.
So you can thank them for that?
Yes.
Okay. But then you moved to
New York.
New York. Alone or with your family?
Alone, 18.
Okay.
I joined a company, American Ballet Theater, which is a large ballet company. But my family, you might say, everyone that I went to high school with at this boarding school either moved to New York or LA upon graduating. So a bunch of us moved to New York together and we moved into this rundown apartment and we created a whole commune in Brooklyn. We had a stable out back, like a horse stable and a barn and fruit trees. And this is in the middle of Williamsburg, Brooklyn. But this was 2000. So it was a really powerful time. It's like when New York and Brooklyn were having its moment. And I look back now and I was like, oh, I was a hipster. I was part of the whole wave of people moving to Williamsburg, Brooklyn. I didn't see it at the time. It was just an affordable place and a bunch of artists could live there together. And that's what we did.
It sounds it sounds like an experience that has at least had some influence on your life.
Yeah.
Like the whole ballet career as well. And we talked about a little bit before we started the podcast about like ballet being an identity, or like you continue to be a ballet dancer even though you're not performing today.
Yeah, I mean, it ties into many of the conversations that we've been having here at Kaospilot. What is your identity? Are you a Kaospilot? Is it because you go to school here? Is it because of a belief system? Is it because of your training? Is it just an identity that you take on? For me, I am a ballet dancer because I think it was the first primary identity that I claimed for myself. And I chose it. And then I danced for 25 years and had a great career. After New York, I moved to San Francisco, and then I created a company and moved to Boise. I've lived in The Hague. I've lived in Madrid. I've lived in Chicago. I've lived in Boston. I mean, dancing has been a great career, but it was, I think, how I saw myself and how I made sense of the world. And so I'll always claim it. It's not my primary identity anymore. But the question that you were asking earlier, are you still a ballet dancer? Yes, because it is in me. It's part of my DNA. But some people say, you don't perform. But that's not what makes someone a thing.
Yeah. How did your journey lead you to leadership? And you studied leadership at Harvard, right?
Yes, I went to graduate school at the Harvard Kennedy School.
But did you study it? Did you study what's it called, pre-graduate or bachelor's?
I never went to college. I never went to college. I never had a bachelor's degree. So Harvard waived that. They didn't require me to have a college degree.
So they accepted you?
Yes.
Anyways.
There was they'd done it before, especially for artists and people that had an exemplary career. So there was kind of a precedent already set that I knew about, and I was able to ask for it. But your question about leadership, I created my own company, a dance company, co-founded it with my partner at the time, and I became an executive director as well as a dancer at 22 years old. So I was running a nonprofit at 22. I was having to raise millions of dollars a year. I was the booking agent, so I was booking us to about 40 to 50 cities a year on tour. I was managing the staff and the board, creating systems, everything on the executive administrative side. And I think that was my crash course in leadership, was how do you bring an idea to life? Like both as an entrepreneur, startup founder, but how do you bring an idea, and how do you make it solvent? How do you fund it? How do you bring other people to that idea, that they care enough about it, that they invest in it with their time, with their money, with their energy? And that was my teaching. I mean, I did that for a decade.
And this is before you go and study leadership officially?
15 years before.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So that kind of leads you to doing it more professionally later on, right?
Yeah, I mean, one thing leads to the next, right?
Yeah.
So it was through creating this company. I gave a lecture in Chicago during intermission of one of the performances of my company, which led to people from the University of Chicago seeing me give a presentation, and they approached me and said, "We think we want you to come to the business school at the University of Chicago and teach creativity." And so that led me having a role. I became a college, lecturer before I ever went to college. I've had a very unlinear path.
Yeah.
So then I began teaching leadership at the University of Chicago and teaching creativity and teaching entrepreneurship as a practitioner. So I was not an academic, right? I'd done these things, and they acknowledged that, which is kind of rare for the University of Chicago because it's a very academic place.
Okay.
Very serious. But I was a foreigner in a strange land, or you could say a stranger in a foreign land. Because the University of Chicago is where Milton Friedman was, where free market capitalism was invented.
Wow.
It was not a world that I felt comfortable in, but I think that was also a really interesting learning lesson about how to exist in these other environments that maybe feel foreign or distant to me. And I began to learn how to translate what I knew from the ballet world or from the nonprofit world into ways that could be taught and understood in a more capitalistic world.
A little bit more straightforward, maybe in some ways, or formulated.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Structured thinking.
Yeah.
Backing up ideas with science. I worked with a lot of behavioral economists, with a lot of cognitive psychologists. I found science and research to back up what I knew to be true as an artist and as a dancer. I connected with people who studied embodied cognition, which is how you store information in your body, which science is beginning to be able to really understand that. Whereas a dancer, I was like, yeah, it's called muscle memory.
Yeah,
right?
Of course.
Yeah. And then later, when I ended up going to the Harvard Kennedy School to get my master's of public administration, and I specialized in leadership, and I trained in adaptive leadership. I don't feel that adaptive leadership says anything new. It just organizes the thinking, and it organizes a bunch of theory and a bunch of science and a bunch of best practice, and it puts it together in a framework. And so when I encountered adaptive leadership, I felt home, I felt seen, because all the things I had already been sort of saying or believing or practicing from my life and career were all reflected in adaptive leadership. And it felt like the language made sense to me, and it felt validating. And I think that resonates with a lot of people when they encounter adaptive leadership. It's not this vague theory. It's about the practice of leadership and what do you do when there's no known solution. And I had already been living that for so long that I felt like I finally had a framework that spoke to me and to my life experience.
And that's what it's about, like adaptive leadership, right? It's about how you lead when there's no known solution.
Yes.
That's like the textbook definition.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So adaptive leadership, the initial premise is what is a technical problem and what is an adaptive problem. And a technical problem, most of the problems in the world are technical, and there is a known problem and there is a known solution. You might not have the solution yet, but it's out there. And it usually requires the experts and the authority to decide, to implement the decision. And then it usually just takes time and money to implement it. An adaptive solution, you don't really fully know what the problem is. There isn't a known solution. The experts and the authority can't fix it. It requires all of the stakeholders to work on it. And yes, time and money are a factor, but it's really what has to happen is change. And it's usually a change of behaviors or norms or beliefs or values. So an adaptive challenge is how do we deal with racism? How do we deal with misogyny? How do we actually combat climate change? We have technical solutions for how to fix climate, but the problem is not the technology or the technical solutions, it's humans. We're not changing our behaviors. We aren't changing what we value, and so the planet will continue to warm. So they're always intermixed, the technical and the adaptive problems.
Yeah.
But the framework, I think, is very helpful. I was just speaking at dinner last night with Federico and all at the Learning Zone, and we were discussing how this language is helpful and useful, maybe even in the curricula of Kaospilot, like just even saying, these are technical problems and technical solutions we're going to teach you here at Kaospilot. Here's how you do this. Here's how you do this. These are great tools to have. And then here's how we're going to teach you how to deal with adaptive problems at Kaospilot. Even separating the two can help give clarity. Because some things you need to learn as a student are, how do you do a project management system? How do you create a case analysis? Like, that's very technical. But how do you actually shift a culture? That's adaptive.
And there's actually a lot of, in my experience, there's a lot of the lectures we have that are also more about how we deal with adaptive problems and challenges. But I think putting it in those categories maybe also helps you understand what it is you're trying to get out of it. What's the purpose of having that lecture? Because that has maybe often been a discussion, at least in my team. Like, why are we dancing around this room to learn about leadership? Like, what is the purpose of that? And maybe it's also connected to how we're used to learning in the normal school systems or where we are from. But I think you're definitely onto something there. It's nice to use as a way to understand and categorize.
Sometimes a problem or something you're learning, like in an academic setting, can feel very overwhelming, and it's helpful sometimes to say, "Oh, this is just something technical.
Yeah,
but I just need to learn how to do it."
Yeah,
it's hard to learn it, but once I know how to do it, it's simple. Where I think sometimes people get overwhelmed with learning, and they think everything is adaptive, or they think everything is technical, and it helps to separate the two.
Could you say that technical learning about technical challenges and solutions, that those are more skill sets that you can acquire, and that adaptive is more continuous practices? Could it be defined like that? Or maybe
I think so. Skill sets, and maybe adaptive work is more mindsets.
Yeah,
like shifting your mind, shifting your perspective, getting more. I mean, there's technical work within adaptive work, of course. Like doing the diagnostic work, the analysis can be somewhat technical, like getting the data, getting the information, weighing it, thinking about it. But there's something ineffable, something the science is the data and the technical, and then there's something almost artistic about when you get to the edge of your competence and you have all the data, but what do you do with it? How do you make sense of it? How do you get others to believe or shift? That's the adaptive edge. And sometimes you have to use a lot of the data and the sense making to get to the edge.
Yeah. About leadership at Harvard, you just said today in our lecture that one of the first things you learned there was never to say that you had studied at Harvard.
Yeah.
Where does that come from? Can you tell me more about that?
There's a lecture that a professor gives, Ronald Heifetz. He's the person who developed adaptive leadership, and he gives a lecture to the entire school.
Entire Harvard?
Well, so Harvard is actually made up of 13 schools.
Okay.
So when I'm saying the school, I mean the Harvard Kennedy School, which has about 1,000 students at a time. A lot of times when people think of Harvard, they are talking about the college, but the college is actually quite small. There's also the law school, the business school, the medical school, the public health school, the education, design, dentistry, school of government, where I went to school. So there's 13 separate schools at Harvard. And so a lot of times people say Harvard, but it's a almost 400-year-old institution. It's not very unified, in fact, when you're there.
It doesn't sound like it, but it makes sense when there's so many people and different. Yeah.
But your question is, Professor Heifetz gives this lecture. He maybe gives it at the end of the year, not the beginning of the year, where he says, when you leave here, everyone's going to want you to solve the problems of the world because they think you went to Harvard and they think that you have all the solutions and that your education means you're smarter than or better than. And I encourage you, these are his words, I encourage you to begin by listening, not to leave this place and think you can tell people what to do or that you do have the solutions. And the moment you tell them that you went to Harvard, they'll either think you're the smartest person in the room and that you should solve everything, or they'll think that you think you're the smartest person in the room and they won't listen to you. So it's a bit of a trap. And that's why the advice given is never say you went to Harvard.
Have you experienced that yourself?
Yeah.
Yeah, being labeled in like other categories.
Yeah, I think I've also experienced more so people thinking that I'm exceptional because of my path, that I was like this ballet dancer who became a business school professor, who went to Harvard, and they love to sort of like have a mythos or a mystique around it, like, oh, you're so special. And I think that really undercuts the point of what I believe, which is that anyone can lead. You can be a janitor in a school and you can lead, because the act of leading is helping guide people to a new idea, a new future. It's using your informal authority. It's helping. It's service. And so sometimes I think this cult of exceptionalism, that like, oh, you're so special and only you can do this, that's a trap as well. It's a seduction, because sure, anyone wants to be told you're special, but it's a seduction that if you start to believe, oh, only I can do this, then you're really not helping people. For instance, I love that I get to come back to Kaospilot. This is my third time now and being at the school, coming back again in June. I hope this relationship continues. It's an honor, and I get to bring an unbelievable team with me of people that are also adaptive leadership, experts. But it would not help Kaospilot or any of the students to think that they could only do this work if I'm here. And so this cult of exceptionalism is dangerous.
Yeah, because it kind of relies on the one person holding the answers and the solution. And that kind of relates to what this sentence or mantra, you could almost call it, that you talk about in your teaching, which is that everyone holds a part of the problem and everyone holds a part of the solution.
Yes.
That sounds like a fundamental belief in both in your work, but also like a personal value.
Yeah, and I think it's also, we live in dangerous times, and there's this rise of authoritarianism, there's the rise of dictatorship. And I think a lot of my hypothesis for it is that a lot of humans are hurting and they just want someone to solve it. And that's why certain figures like Trump or Orban or Putin or these dictators around the world, they say, I can fix it. And they can't. It's a lie because no one person can fix it. Or if they are going to solve something, they're only going to solve it for their faction, for their group.
Yeah.
Often to the detriment of others. So like, I'm a queer man. My husband and I live in a very conservative state in America. And most of what the state legislature does in Idaho is solving for only a certain type of person. Most of the rules that they're making, and they keep saying, oh, we're going to fix the state. We're going to make it better. That it does not help me. It's making it harder and harder for me to live there.
Yeah.
So this idea of authoritarianism and a charismatic authority solving the problems is because I think certain parts of society just want the pain to go away and they want things to be simpler. And so they say, please take care of it for me. And I think that's dangerous. The opposite is true, in my opinion, which is we're all part of the problem. We're all part of the solution. And the only way that we change as humans is through our interdependency and our ability to actually rely on each other and work with each other and collaborate with each other to create positive change. And so it is a mantra. It's also an aspiration.
Yeah.
It's also, there's also lots and lots and lots of proof that humans function best that way.
Yeah, it also speaks to like the value of collaboration and tackling problems together.
Yes.
Yeah. But today you have a consultancy, am I right?
Yes.
And you also said you were a public speaker within like creativity and leadership. Is there more on your professional plate in the present?
Yeah, I would think of myself as having my work is sort of 5 different verticals if we want to try and classify it. So one is teaching. I really enjoy teaching, like the process we've gone through here at Kaospilot. Often in a more academic setting. I teach in a couple of different universities. One is public speaking, where I get hired to speak at conferences or festivals or by corporate clients or by nonprofit clients to come and speak about change, about creativity, about leadership. And that's where I also still feel like I get to be a performer. Like people say, do you miss dancing or do you miss performing? And no, I don't, because I still get to do it.
Are you standing on a stage then often as well? Yeah.
And it's a harnessing of who you are and the energy in you, and being like what I learned as a performer was it's this rarefied ephemeral moment that happens, and it's about conjuring everything you have to become this version of you, this really heightened version of you. And so when I get to do public speaking, it feels the same. I enter the same sort of flow state. And I often do a presentation with my husband where we choreograph a piece of dance in front of everyone. And we use that as a vehicle to talk about whatever the client needs us to talk about, but usually about change, about how do you move humans towards an idea. And we show it in real time through this sort of tabula rasa, straw man. We make a piece of choreography that everyone experiences and sees. And it's very subjective. It makes them think of their own scenarios. So whether the client recently was Starbucks, and it's like, how do you manage a Starbucks store? Presenting in a room of thousands of Starbucks store managers, or whether it's a festival, an AI festival, and we're talking about how is there still humanity and co-creation even in these virtual spaces? Like, how do we get back to being humans together? Whatever the topic is, we use this vehicle. So that's the second vertical. The third is I do executive coaching. I've never really called myself a coach. I just keep getting more clients, kind of word of mouth. Yeah. And I enjoy that one-on-one process. Like Emil Koch, student here, who is the one who brought me to Kaospilot, because he came and saw a presentation I gave in Berlin a couple of years ago and said, will you mentor me? And so we started doing sessions. And then he vouched for me and fought really hard to bring this curricula to Kaospilot, which we did for the first time last June. The fourth thing I do is advising, which is more like sitting on boards, paid advising, which is different than coaching, different than consulting. And then finally, consulting is when I think of it as like a full package, when you get hired to sort of do a version of all of it together. You're teaching, you're lecturing, you're coaching, you're facilitating, you're advising. That's consulting. I usually have one consulting client at a time.
Okay. And what do all of these 5 pillars have in common? Is it leadership or
Change,
change?
I would say,
Mm.
which goes hand in hand with leadership to a degree.
Yeah.
But I think all of them have in common, how do we help people, systems, organizations move from their current reality to their aspired reality?
Mm. I'm very curious, like when you enter new organizations or corporations, like how do you approach them, and like is change always needed, and are organizations always ready for changing as well? Yeah.
Change is constant. So change is happening whether we want it or not. The pace of change or how radical the change is not always needed. So I don't take on clients that need more sort of management consulting. I think of management as technical, like helping them maximize or do better what they're already doing. I don't do that type of consulting. I think it's great. It's necessary. Like big companies like McKinsey do what I would consider sort of technical consulting, helping them figure out how to do what they're doing already better. Most of my clients are looking at an adaptive challenge. They don't know what to do. They just know something's not working. It might be part of their business model. It might be part of their leadership. It might be just the human element. It might be that they have to completely re-envision their identity as a company. And those are the types of clients I take on.
So most of them are aware that there's something that needs to change or become better.
Or at least one faction or one stakeholder within the company feels
the one that hires you in. That makes a lot of sense.
So then part of my job is helping ripen, to your question, ripening the problem, like helping them understand like a piece of fruit. They might bring me in when it's not ripe yet, but they know that it needs to be harvested. And part of the work is helping them ripen it so that they can do something with it.
Mm. You touched a little bit upon it before, but it was Emil from third year, team 28, who were kind of like, he got in contact with you, and he was the one that brought you to become a lecturer to Kaospilot. Mm-hmm. Like, how has can you tell us a little bit about the relationship you've had with Kaospilot since, and had you heard about the school before? And
I had never heard of the school prior to meeting Emil, but the moment I learned about it, it was similar to how I felt when I came to adaptive leadership, or when I realized that I wanted to be a ballet dancer. There's a feeling you have when you know that you're home, or there's a shared belief system, or a shared sense of purpose. So from what I first understood about Kaospilot, and what I continue to learn, is what it exists to do in the world is to truly create and train change agents. I think that's incredible, because so much of education is just very technical, and this place is striving to do it differently. It is an imperfect system, Kaospilot, like any place. It's going through major changes in terms of its own identity. It's going through major authority shifts. It's going through shared loss and grieving, because I think the idea of what has been a Kaospilot for 30 years is maybe changing, because the world has changed. And so it's such an exciting time, because the people that are here now, the students primarily, get to now say, we are what a Kaospilot is now and moving forward. Because the world of 1992 needed exceptionalism and needed charismatic leaders. And that's not necessarily what the world needs anymore. So my experience with Kaospilot for the past couple of years is bearing witness to this change that's happening at the school.
Mm. And the mentoring you do for some students, at least I know you've done for Emil, for example, it's for free, I think. It's kind of volunteer work.
It is.
Right? Yeah.
It has been, yeah.
Like, what is it that also drives you to do that? Is that the same as you speak about the like feeling of home and the similar belief systems? Yeah.
Part of the decisions I've made in my career, I decided I've had jobs, I've worked in organizations, I've worked in institutions, but a while ago, a decade or so ago, I decided I only wanted to do work that mattered to me. And so I only take on clients, or I only do work that matters. Now, some of those clients pay very, very well, and they help subsidize other clients that can't or don't pay. So in terms of working with certain students and coaching, I have certain coaching clients that pay me a lot of money by the hour, and that's great. I only take on clients I want to work with. And Kaospilots in general, I think, are going through this incredible transformation, and I have certain skills that maybe can be helpful in coaching and guiding them, but more so, I think they just need a thought partner. They need some validation and they need some guidance, just like all humans do. And so I love working with Kaospilots because they're so advanced and they're thinking, you've studied all kinds of theories, you already have a whole language for systems change. With certain clients, I have to start at the beginning, like teach them about systems change and teach them about, and I have to do that with KPs. You're ready to go. So that's rewarding for me because you want to work with people that are able to like meet you on a certain level. And then the other part of it is I also really enjoy having a very diverse set of clients. And I mean that in all senses. I have a gender balance in clients I take on. I try to have a racial balance in terms of clients I take on. And I try to have an age balance. And so I think I wouldn't be very good at my job if I only had a certain type of client who had a certain mindset and a certain behavior. I would become limited in my own perspective and worldview. So the other self-serving part of working with KPs is a whole other perspective. It's European, perhaps more Scandinavian, of a certain age, but it helps me keep my finger on the pulse also of like, what's the next generation of change agents look like? What do they care about? What do they believe? And then that helps inform how I go speak to then a client who's a boomer, right?
Yeah, I could imagine it like that having a diverse set of clients also like it feeds the work and in many ways like feeds the perspectives, and then that gives more to each client maybe.
Yes.
Yeah, if that makes sense. But
That does make sense.
Yeah, it's interesting. But you do a lot of work both in Europe and the US, and also from what I've heard, like generally around the world. Is it how has it developed, or how is it? How did you get there? Like, did you start working primarily with clients in the US or in Europe?
My consultancy started when I was at University of Chicago, and it was because I'd give presentations or lectures for alumni. And then alumni of the business school started to hire me to come work with their companies. And that's when I think I had the mindset shift of, I could do this. And there's always the imposter syndrome. Like, I'm not a consultant.
Yeah.
Because I was comparing myself to like a McKinseyite, or that's what a consultant is. And I had to sort of be like, I can call myself a consultant and I can be it however I want to be it. I can be me. And my brother's a lawyer. And so I was like, can you help me file my paperwork, like get the business started? And he did. So technically my company is legally based in Georgia, where I'm from, which I never go there anymore. But that's because my brother's an attorney there. But then life is just relationships, and life is being open to possibility. And one thing leads to the next, and it's a vouching system. So all of my coaching clients came to me because of someone else I had coached, and they referred me. All of my speaking engagements are because someone saw me speak at another speaking engagement, and they brought me to theirs.
It's a domino effect. Yeah.
And so, my advice for anyone who's going to be an independent consultant or self-employed to a degree, working for yourself or building your own business, is you never know the people you're working with when you will meet them again. Like right here with me on this project is Eric Nussbaumer and Elle Dodd, who I trained with, and Elle trained me in adaptive leadership. And now they're here on the teaching team for this project. We graduated together 6 years ago. So you never know when these connections are meaningful. And I said earlier today in the final lecture, I had everyone, 100 of us in a big circle holding hands. And I said, you just never know who in the circle right now is going to be the person that you're collaborating with 10 years from now. Mm. And you have to be very loving about how you manage and tend the relationships. And you have to be open to possibility. So all of my work has been because someone vouched for me.
And that's keeps on giving. And yeah, seeds that plant in different places, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah. But you also told me before that you worked a little bit with governments. Is that different from the work you do with organizations and corporates? Or is it all similar?
I think it's similar.
Yeah.
Some of the conditions can be different. Governments, by their nature, are more bureaucratic systems. So they're more internal facing, even though they serve the people. They're sort of internal. They're not market oriented, for instance. They're not listening to market signal. And they're usually very hierarchical, where a lot of startups are more external facing and hierarchical, move fast, get things done. More communal organizations are often more internal and dispersed decision making. So often nonprofits are like that. Yeah. Not always, but also like community-led organizations. And then the fourth sort of type of organization are more like innovative organizations that are external facing, listening to the world, less hierarchical, multi-stakeholder engagement. That's where I specialize, but a lot of times I'll interface with like a bureaucratic or a communal or an action-oriented organization, and they want me to help them become more innovative. And so the steps to move them along are different for like a government versus a startup versus a corporation versus a nonprofit. The end goal is the same, helping them be more change-oriented and more innovative. But again, the roadmap is different for each because they have their own restrictions and limitations that they need to first let go of.
Yeah. Is that the goal at the guiding star, maybe I would say? That's, I think you mentioned it a few times, like change or being change-oriented or action? Action agents.
Okay.
No, what did you say? You just said it.
Action-oriented?
Action-oriented, yeah. Yeah, and aspiring for change.
Yeah.
Is that like somewhat of a guiding star in your work?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'd say so.
Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe it's again because where I come from as an artist and a dancer. One thing you learn in being a dancer is you're going to do the same exact set of steps and choreography. You're going to perform it hundreds and hundreds of times. That's the technical part. The artistry is what do you do with it every time? How do you make each performance come alive? And it will be different every time. There's choices, there's micro choices. That's the artistry. And so I think because of that background, I believe that even if the functions and the steps are the same, it's what you do with it and how you guide people towards that change. There's a real level of humanity and artistry in that. And so that is my guiding principle, that I think we're all capable of art making, all of us. That does not mean you do it through an art form. I think it's in how you make decisions in a day as a form of artistry, how you communicate with others, how you listen, how you lead, how you follow. It's all a form of artistry. And if you see it as such, I think it gives you just a lot more options and possibilities.
It's very beautiful, I think. What are your aspirations as of now?
And why are you asking that?
Because you asked us that in the end of our lecture today. Yeah. We were talking about ambitions and aspirations, the difference between those two. We talked about that ambition was more what you want to get out of life, for example, and aspirations were more around breathing life into something. You also connected it to the origin of the word aspirations, but I can't remember that part.
Aspire, Latin for breathing life into. Yeah.
So I thought it was really inspiring. So now I'm wondering, what are your aspirations? Because you asked us before.
Well, I'll start with my ambitions, which are simpler. Even though I've been talking about this vouching system and how it's been beautifully leading to work, there's definitely been many years where there wasn't enough work. Like, we've never gone hungry. But my ambition, and it's now happening, is that enough relationships, enough irons have been in the fire for so long that there's now a very constant stream of work. And that's an ambition. That's what I'm getting. I'm getting meaning. I'm getting purpose out of it. I'm getting validation. I'm getting money. I'm getting a sense of like momentum, like, wow, this is really working. And it's not that I have lacked for work. It's more like there's a constant momentum of work right now. My aspiration at the highest level of abstraction is that I believe our future as a human race is a more peaceful, equitable, collaborative world. And I believe we're capable of it. I also believe that a lot of destruction will have to happen, is happening, before we as a human race can become more equal, peaceful, collaborative. But my aspiration is that I know that I have the capacity to help make systems and individuals and organizations move closer and closer towards that world. I can't do it for them. I can't do it, but I can help. And my aspiration is to help breathe life into that world that I believe is our future.
Well, in those words, I think we will end this conversation. But thank you so much for chatting with us and coming to the podcast.
Thank you.
So that was it for today's episode of the Pilot Podcast. We've been speaking with John Michael and heard a lot of his life stories and little bits of his journey that have led him to where he is today. Stay tuned for more inspiring podcast episodes here on the Pilot Podcast.